Another day, another possible trade scenario for Kevin Durant, for Kyrie Irving, for maybe even Ben Simmons. But before we get to that, what about Woj bombs saying that the Nets need not push the panic button and commit to a trade anytime soon? We'll break down all that as we come out of the holiday weekend right after the theme music.
You are Locked On Nets, your daily Brooklyn Nets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Brooklyn, yo. That's right. It's the Locked On Nets podcast right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team, the Brooklyn Nets, every single day. Over there, you're going to find Doug Norrie, owner-operator DFSR, for all your daily fantasy sports rankings. DraftKings, FanDuel, he's got you covered. I'm Adam Marbeck, breaking down the New York Football Giants on the One Giant podcast with my boy, Andy Mack. We thank you for making us your first listen of the day, free on all those great platforms. And Doug, where we start is with all of the fevered excitement around, and excitement could be a dangerous word to use, but there's obviously a lot of tension around what's going to happen with Kevin Durant, with Kyrie Irving. The Brooklyn Nets organization is trying to move forward. And before we even get into some of these scenarios, including Ben Simmons and how he plays into all of this, a little bit of a Woj bomb where he came out on a Monday and said, yeah, the Nets aren't necessarily compelled to do anything in the near future. Nothing like a little just chef's kiss coming off of the 4th of July fireworks.
I'm actually not shocked by this. Like, he was on ESPN. He was talking about just the scenario. This is going to be the talking point for most NBA heads from now until it resolves, because could be ground shifting in the NBA, depending on where Kevin Durant, and I guess by some extension, Kyrie Irving as well, depending on where they go. So expect to hear about this like line of talk from now until, like Woj said, maybe the beginning of the season, because he's saying that, I'll paraphrase part of what he said, but it was essentially the Nets have not received any offers that have moved them in any substantial way. Doesn't seem like they're prepared to sell for 50 cents on the dollar, or, in a situation where they're probably already going to have to sell 75 cents on the dollar.
Right.
And so, and he just basically said that they're prepared to wait them out. But they're going to say, we have them under contract. We're not obligated to trade them. We will try to, I'm paraphrasing really big time here, but we just don't have to do it. If the offer is not worth it, we have Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving under contract, and they can decide what they want to do. Now, I will say about Woj, what we do know about how this reporting has gone is that it has seemed like in the past, Woj has carried a significant amount of water, media water, for the Nets front office. Like, this is how, during the James Harden, to the point where he sort of even lost some credibility, like around the Harden for Simmons trade, because he was adamant that was not going to happen. And then it happened. Right. Like, and so whether he was head faked or, again, he was helping the Nets front office sort of sidestep some media stuff, unclear. But we've said in the past that when Woj talks, it's typically from the organizational side, and Shams Charania has a little bit been from the player side. Not 100% of the time, but that is how it works. So this does feel like a message sent directly from the Nets that says, hey, like, we're not going to do it. If it's some mid-tier player and a couple of draft picks, we're just we'll try to make amends with Kevin Durant, or we'll wait till someone else just ups the offer, because we don't have to do it. We have him under contract for the next 4 years. And that's just the state of the union right now for where they stand. It could get ugly. I don't know, but I mean, that's where it seems like it is now.
Well, it's also we're months away from the start of the NBA season. Now you have training camp. We know that Summer League is kicking off here at the end of the week. You've got, even on the one hand, you've got all these trade conversations. On the other hand, you got social media videos of Day'Ron Sharpe and Alondes Williams, who officially signed his 2-way contract, and DD Jen. They're like, we're here, baby, looking to go win some games. Like, there is also, just on a brief aside, like, there are just two sides of the brain firing for the Brooklyn Nets, right? On the one hand, and that to me, it's like, on the one hand, we know we need to progress forward in whatever our offseason looks like. And these young players probably don't care about what happens, higher up above them. They just want to go play basketball. And they now know probably too, hey, my path to minutes is a whole lot clearer if we're talking about these big names getting moved. And then on the other side is the conversation around the trades. And I think this can be two things. One, we don't need to trade specifically with Kevin Durant. I mean, Kyrie as well. He opted in. We don't need to trade them this second. And it also can signal to the rest of the league or teams that are genuinely interested, continue to get your ducks in a row, right? Figure out what it's going to take, right? Come to terms with what you're willing to sacrifice or not, because we can sit here and let you guys get organized. And it's one of the things that they said at the onset of this too, just in general of, the Brooklyn Nets don't want to make a panic move here, and they don't need to. So it's like you catch your breath a little bit after Kevin Durant sends the, hey, I'd like to be traded request, and Kyrie Irving clearly is going to be on the outs here. But I think it makes sense to be a little bit calculated, whether or not Woj is signaling a message of any kind from the organization or not. There's plenty of time. It feels like everything's ramped up because it happened just around the draft and just around free agency starting, and everybody else is signing players, and you're seeing big assets go all over the place. And you go, yeah. And guess what? All these teams are still going to have players and draft capital to send our way potentially down the road. And who knows how some of these teams flesh out and maybe miss out on other options they have on the market. No one else is going to go out and get a Kevin Durant, but they can turn around and say, well, we were targeting a couple of smaller pieces. That didn't work out. And it further solidifies our pursuit of KD.
Yeah, and I would say from the trade timing standpoint, like there was no favors done by having this done on the eve of the draft, right? 2 weeks before the draft, where you can potentially trade picks from this year's draft, maybe makes things potentially easier for some of these teams, right? Like if you can step in and just have, just ownership of a draft pick from this past year, there was no timeline. There was no time for that, it seemed like, in the moment. So because the request seemed to come basically like, did it come like the day before the draft, the day of the draft? Maybe I can't remember exactly which day, or maybe after. Now I can't remember.
I'm on the eve of the day of free agency.
Sorry, right. Okay, sorry. So it's even worse. I mismanaged that one. Right. It came after the draft. Where if this had come before the draft, you open up all the people that had draft picks this year to just have one more chip to throw in, right? Like, so that's a part of it. And then also the part where I do think in terms of waiting it out, it is significantly easier to do trades during the offseason. The pace is a little slower. Like, teams can kind of like set a roadmap for themselves. Trades tend to happen on the fly around the trade deadline, but all teams' motivations have changed by then. Right now, like most teams view themselves as like in the conversation, right? And so, or like in winning wise, most teams want to win. Now they don't all line up with what they can offer for Kevin Durant, but it's why before the season, it's typically easier to get a trade done because you're not in a panic sort of timeline move. But it's what can also extend the timeline now because no one's, like you said, no one's in a rush, right? Like the season's months away. You have all the time in the world to just up the offer. It has to be better. We're not going to panic. There's no trade deadline happening here. It's not like, Thursday at 6 p.m., everyone's got to get it into the league. No, that's not what's happening here. We have months to figure it out. Hey, Kevin Durant side, you go talk to some of these organizations. Right. Usually that's allowed. That's typically allowed in situations like this. Like you or your agent, typically your agent, can go and speak with a team and you go try to figure it out. And see if there's something that can be done. A lot of times trades are done via agents because they can kind of, they can sort of back channel and talk and kind of be a way station between the two teams. So this is all to say, I'm totally for this line of thinking. I stand firmly in the, don't do it because don't do it just because you have to. And there is one other funny thing about this. I did say that we said on a previous podcast that there was no reason for the Nets to tank because going forward, a long-term tank isn't going to matter. Right. The one time they can tank is this year because it's only a pick swap with Houston, who also projects to kind of stink. And so my
worst for your worst.
And how bad are either going to be? Like the Nets went fully in the tank because KD and Kyrie were going to sit out, right? Like they said, nope. Taking the ball, going home. We're not playing. You have to trade us. I think I'm correct about this. Like this year, because of the Stepien rule where you can't trade consecutive first round picks, like the Nets have their pick this year, but it's only a pick swap. So they still have a first round pick. It's not like Houston. It doesn't convey to Houston. It just swaps with them. Like now there was never a world where it seemed like that was going to actually matter. But if they're both bad, there's a world where it could both be lottery tickets, right? So this is the one scenario where I'm like, if they tank, this
1 year
one
tank
year
job.
might not be so bad, and like just trade someone to the deadline. All right, I know I kind of went on there for a little bit. All right, I know we're gonna get into a bunch of other stuff around this stuff. First, going to talk to you about our friends over at Arcade One Up. We got big news. You've been hearing us talking about this. The timeline and the deadline is almost up. NBA Jam is back. Arcade One Up is the leader in home retro arcade games, and they're bringing back the best game ever, NBA Jam. Now this time with a Shaq Edition machine. If you are an NBA Jam fan, like if you grew up around when I did, this was the actual Jam. One of the best video games ever made. One of the most fun ones to play. Totally part of the zeitgeist at the time. It was for the first games to ever feature real and digitized licensed teams. No fouls, no free throws, no quarters required for this one. You can compete with friends and family through all new Wi-Fi leaderboards, making you more connected than ever. Pre-order now from arcade1up.com. That's arcade, the number one up.com for an estimated early September ship date. They got classics like Golden Tee and Mortal Kombat as well, starting at just $3.99. Got to check it out. NBA Jam Shaq Edition. They're giving one away to a Locked On listener. Enter for a chance to get your game console for that man cave. Arcade1up.com/locked on. Arcade1, arcade, the number one up.com/locked on. You had till July 8th to enter to win the NBA Jam Shaq Edition console. Arcade1up.com/locked on.
Speaking of Shaq, incidentally, because we're going to get into the other piece around, we had talked about the Golden State Warriors, a little bit of rumor there, fun little bonus episode, just having not a goof, but a much more lighter look at that, because I think that one was kind of getting thrown out there pretty loosely. And then it came down to what ends up being the Ben Simmons of it all. What happens with Ben Simmons and how does he impact what the Brooklyn Nets can do? Which, by the way, is a reason to say this is why we're also pushing pause on our side. We need to figure out if there are potential offers with teams that involve the CBA stipulated can't have two rookie extension contracts on the books at the same time. Well, maybe we need to preemptively move Ben Simmons off our books so it opens up some of those opportunities. And this could be happening on all sides of these teams. But you mentioned Shaq there, as a matter. There was a Tim Bontemps article that he came out with over on ESPN that talked about like lessons for the Brooklyn Nets to come into these trade negotiations with. And I want to get into Ben Simmons, but I thought it was interesting. He referenced back to a couple of different situations, but one being LA 2004, when the Lakers and the Heat were lining up to make a trade with Shaq. And initially, and this is lessons to be learned around, maybe you can't get the best player from the other team, even when trading away a superstar. They wanted Dwayne Wade. Miami immediately hung up the phone. Eventually, they turn back around, and it ends up being Lamar Odom, Butler. You get a couple of draft picks as well, and O'Neal goes down to Miami, and then things kind of reset there, and we know they go on to win Dwayne Wade's first title. Just on that point there, because we talked about the other day for Toronto, or if it's Phoenix and wanting the best player, do you think that there are those scenarios where you do have to say, if you're Brooklyn, we want X, but we may have to accept Y? Because I know a lot of fans are saying, like, why would you ever take anything less than the best possible package? And I think at some point, not that you're on a desperate timeline, but just at some point, you have to make a decision. If you are going to trade Kevin Durant, you have to come to consensus whether it ends up being a player of your choosing or taking more draft capital as opposed to getting the name that you want.
Yeah, this is the, like, the devil's bargain you're kind of making here, right? It's like you have to do something. You're hoping that there's enough of a market where every team is properly incentivized to continue offering better things because they're competing against each other. Every time Kevin Durant, something leaked is like, hey, he wants to play with two all-stars, or he's got to like in a win now team. It just slowly chips away at the available teams that can even make the trade. If you're going to make these demands, like if the league is not fully open to all teams available to you willing to go to, it just hurts it hurts the Nets' ability to trade you. And so I kind of like never understand that part of it. I get like wanting to go where you want to go, but you have to have an understanding that that's going to severely limit the market, right?
Yeah.
Because everyone's going to be concerned if you're even going to want to be there. And all these conversations would happen ahead of time. Like if X team wanted to get involved with Kevin Durant, there would be conversations to say like some assurances that, hey, you're not going to just turn around and ask for another trade. But I'll put it this way. There's almost no world, I would think, in this situation where the Nets get full value back in Kevin Durant. Like, I just don't think, I don't think the situation is set up that way. It's not open to enough teams in the league. He's just probably a little too old. like for everyone, for people to get interested. So like, I just don't think, I think at some point there will be a reckoning on what the Nets fans or the front office has to like endure about what they're getting back.
Yeah.
Just because that's just usually how these things work.
By the way, a future potential star, right, in the league. That's what the Nets are saying they want to get back. Even if you get a guy that you think has future potential, all NBA, Hall of Fame NBA talent, you go, that's future. Right now, Kevin Durant is that guy. So you're always going to look at the incoming player and go, well, he's not Kevin Durant. Look, obviously he's not. And that's what makes this one fascinating about the Ben Simmons piece, where he is on the rookie extension. So there's these questions around, would the Nets maybe think about moving him ahead of time? I'm curious to get your take on that. I think it need not matter in some ways to me. Like, Ben Simmons he's just a guy. He is not the needle mover for me around as far as what the Nets do going forward. So if that facilitates something, I'm all for it. And when we talk about one of the trades that we didn't get to the other day, the Miami Heat, and the reason why we didn't get to him is because theoretically, if that were to be a conversation, that's the one of the two teams. It's Phoenix Suns and the Miami Heat that has been reported Durant would want to go to. They have Bam Adebayo, and that would be the first guy. That's the centerpiece of a trade for the Brooklyn Nets. We want Bam Adebayo back. You'd have to move out Ben Simmons. You can answer either one. Do the Nets need to get Ben Simmons out of here now so they open up these opportunities? And then on the Miami piece of it, is Bam Adebayo touchable? To your point, like, is that a name that the Heat go, oh, well, we'll take Kevin Durant, we'll lose Bam Adebayo, and we still feel like we're going to be, at the apex of winning a championship?
Yeah, so just to rewind that on 2 seconds here, like the reason they can't trade for Bam Adebayo now with Ben Simmons on the roster is because you can't trade for two players on the designated rookie extension. And you can have two players on your team, but you can't trade for two of them, right? Like, so you're never going to get harmed by just drafting really well and having designated rookie extensions on the guys you drafted. You just can't trade for those guys. The list of guys that fall under that category. So obviously one is Ben Simmons, who they already traded for. So as long as he's on the roster, by the way, and they have to be on you can do it as many times as you want, but they can't be on the roster at the same time. The list, Andrew Wiggins, Joel Embiid, Devin Booker, Jamal Murray, Michael Porter Jr., Jason Tatum, Bam, Karl Anthony Towns, Donovan Mitchell. This is an interesting one. De'Aaron Fox, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, Luka, Trae Young, and then Zion Williamson just signed his, so he's off the list also. So that's the list of players that cannot be traded for. The Nets cannot trade for as long as Ben Simmons is on the roster. Now, going back to Bam, yes, like Bam is a perfect example of why this Kevin Durant trade is so sticky. Not sticky. It's like unsticky in terms of getting done. Bam is the exact guy, if you were trying to win a championship, that you cannot trade if you're the Heat. You can't, you have to start hanging the phone up because you need him. Like, you need what he does. You need his defense. You need how he facilitates offense. You need everything about him. He's like a borderline / he is a superstar, right? He's not on the top tier, but if he's your third best player on your team, like, you are in the championship conversation for sure. Right. And so this is why these trades start falling down, because the Heat are like, no chance, we'll never win. And the Nets are like, no chance. What, did I take Tyler Hero back? Like, no chance. Like the guy was basically played off the court at times in the playoffs against bigger teams. Like, he can score or whatever, but like, this is the kind of guy that we're going to build a package around. No, thank you. And so this is why, actually, in terms of we mentioned the Toronto deal, this is why I'm not shocked by the Woj news here, right? It's like this very situation. So much
mechanics to work out, to figure out, even if it's possible or not possible.
The incentives are completely misaligned for the teams that are involved in these trades. Like, everyone wants to win the championship, and the Nets want to keep winning. That is a really hard trade to make. Like, that is a really, really difficult trade to make, because someone's going to need to send something back, which inhibits their chance of winning if they get Kevin Durant in the Nets' eyes. Again, unlike the Rudy Gobert or the DeJounte Murray trade, where the Jazz look like they're headed to the tank and the Spurs are all the way in the tank already, right? Like, those guys, they don't care. Give us all the draft picks. Don't send any players back. We don't want to win. All good. We're done here. This is just a different situation. And the Bam example, and it's actually, frankly, it has even less to do with the designated rookie extension and more to do with just the player. This is why, again, like Woj saying that they're not going to do anything rash. It's because I can see it. Like, there's probably just no good offers coming, right? Like, and this is like a perfect example of probably why not.
Yeah, I find that fast. I'll be curious on the other side here to break down a little bit. But one thing I will say is you mentioned De'Aaron Fox in there, which by the way is what makes it tricky because I was fleshing out scenarios of how you move Ben Simmons off the books. You bring in a third team. We're going to look back at that Toronto and Phoenix situation and how they can try to make that work. But when you bring in a third team, you say, well, De'Aaron Fox is making $30 million. Yes, and he happens to be on a rookie extension. That makes it again a complicated procedure to try to get all these guys to places and then still end up with the receiving team. Kevin Durant's going to say, I'm looking forward to playing with Jimmy Butler and Bam Adebayo. And that's what's going to make this one fall down, I think. Still opportunities, though, for Brooklyn to have productive conversations. Maybe just not with Miami.
All right, we are going to get into a little bit more here. Again, this is going to be what we're talking about. This might be the whole summer. This might be the summer of KD as far as we're doing this July 4th. You know, maybe the dogs are still on the grill right now. That's okay. We're inside. We're talking KD trades. And I feel like that is going to be the situation that's going on all summer. We're going to get to a little bit more of it here. First, got to talk to you about our friends over at Built Bar. They've invented the healthy and tasty protein bar. They figured this out, folks. The protein bar used to be this like sort of gelatinous blob that you just never knew what the flavor was. It was a little cardboard, a little sponge. It would say protein on the box. You never were sure. Built Bar figured it out by figuring out the flavors. And then they went one step beyond and they started doing the puffs things. They got the coconut brownie chunk puffs right now. If you go over and get the puffs, you're going to get 100% real chocolate. It's like a fluffy cloud of coconut brownie goodness. That's their words, but I will happily parrot it. Stop drooling and listen. They're good for you. They have low calorie, low sugar, high protein. They're all super delicious. Best part about the Built Puffs is they taste amazing. You can enjoy them guilt-free because they're actually good for you. The perfect treat when you got that craving. You go to built.com right now. You use the promo code LOCKED15. You're going to get 15% off your order. That's going to include the puffs. That's going to include the bars. It's all included there at built.com. So go to built.com, use the promo code LOCKED15 for 15% off built.com.
Okay, so I do want to get back into the Toronto Raptors and the Phoenix Suns. We were talking about those trade packages separately, knowing that the Brooklyn Nets don't seem to want to take back DeAndre Ayton, and there's a world where you start to bring all three teams together and give yourself an opportunity. I will briefly touch on the Miami one. I just wanted to throw this out there. Do you think that sending Ben Simmons back to Miami and swapping those rookie extension contracts would be appealing to the Miami Heat, right? Obviously, in theory, if he's healthy, you're getting back a valuable player that you could say, yeah, we can go win with, but it's going to be that question mark around, is it Ben Simmons or is it just a guy named Ben Simmons?
I mean, does Ben Simmons strike you as like a Heat culture kind of guy? Because he doesn't to me. Like, I don't know him personally. I don't know him personally. So I guess I need to be careful about what I say here. But
one more flesh out then, because I think you're right on that piece. One more flesh out would be, would De'Aaron Fox coming from the Kings interest Miami at all? Because originally I said Ben Simmons out to the Kings, so it's like, and then the point that I'm almost making here, it's like you're trying to create scenarios where Miami goes, okay, we lost Bam Adebayo, but we got back X, right? We replace him with something else that's still going to be with Kevin Durant, with Jimmy Butler, a viable opportunity. Kings may not be that team because they haven't exactly had a track record of building up their talent.
Yeah, I don't see that happen. I mean, maybe you want to send Ben Simmons to Sacramento because you think like they can kind of take him in, but they made a commitment to Fox. Like they chose him over Halliburton. Like I don't think I don't think that they're in the mode of just trading away another guy. I mean, they kind of pulled the rug out from Halliburton sort of to some degree because he was shocked about getting traded. That organization has seemed like kind of a mess. So who knows what they would do, but I don't see it. I mean, of this list of designated guys, I will say again, a lot of these are fraught with peril too. Like we talked a little bit about Wiggins on the bonus pod. There are a couple other guys like Michael Porter Jr. super interesting, but he just sat out the whole season, right? Like, so, swapping out some of these different guys, like that's not going to happen. A lot of the other guys are franchise cornerstones that are just not moving anywhere, a la, Tatum, Cat. The one guy is like Donovan Mitchell. I think we'll wait on Donovan. I think we'll maybe do Donovan Mitchell tomorrow because I do think there's like a Utah thing. I think we don't have enough time tonight to get into the whole thing, but like Donovan Mitchell, if you're starting to add three teams into it and you're looking to move like a DRE guy off of one books onto this to get Ben Simmons out for like a rebuild or something like that, the Utah seems to have signaled that like they're tearing this whole thing all the way to the studs. Right. So because sending Gobert out, getting 1 million picks, it doesn't seem like Donovan Mitchell's too far behind. That's a guy that you could start thinking about like how he could begin to move into some of these guys. So anyway, I know we have a couple other things to talk about here. So we'll save the Mitchell piece for tomorrow because I do think that one is interesting.
Yeah, no, yes, 100%. I would be fascinated to see where we both land on it, actually. Definitely check out that episode because it's going to come to around where would Mitchell be going and what would it mean for the Brooklyn Nets potentially if that's the player that was coming back to them in all of these mechanics. But the one thing we did talk about was those separate packages, Phoenix and Toronto. The fascinating thing is when you join these two clubs together and have a menage a trois of NBA trade discussions, because the Nets don't want Ayton, but Ayton on the Toronto Raptors could make a lot of sense. He is still young. So we talk about a team that wants to potentially make a move here, understanding that Siakam has a lot of money on the books. He's getting closer to 30 than 25. You have Scotty Barnes waiting in the wings. We all know the Nets are going to want Scotty Barnes back in a trade, but if you send Kevin Durant to Phoenix and Ayton to Toronto, the Nets can end up getting the best version of a couple of young pieces, some draft capital as well, and walk away maybe not wholly satisfied, a la Scotty Barnes or Booker, but they can get the best second player on both of these rosters potentially in this trade.
Yeah, and that's where you said before, and you've been a proponent of this, is like where the adding additional teams in just does sort of smooth out some of the problems, right? Like, because the more now it creates more problems because it creates more moving parts, right? Like you have to just make it creates more incentives and more disincentives for teams to like sort of align with what's happening. But like adding those other teams in begins to remove some of the sticking points around money, because the money doesn't have to match up 1-to-1. Like it could be, the money can be spread out between a bunch of different teams that can swap a bunch of different contracts. Two, it can like begin to send out a lot more players that fit the needs of different teams so that you're not confined to all these different rules. Like it's like from a 1-to-1 trade. And three, like well, I guess it's just those two things, like the money and the money and the players, like, but and this is why these 4-teamers usually come in late. It's like how teams like start inserting themselves after the trade, right? Yeah. It's because it's like would you be shocked if this Utah trade with Gobert ended up, people started piggybacking that trade, right?
Oh,
like with some of the this is where it's both more difficult and easier. It's just so weird. Like the NBA's trade landscape is so weird around this stuff. It would be so easy if you did not need to match the money. If you could just send out like this guy's contract and send me picks back, you would see so many more trades in the NBA.
Oh, yeah.
like it'd be so much easier.
I think it's a good thing to put a little bit of to put these like gymnastics that you have to jump through all these hoops, because otherwise, I mean, this is just like from an NBA enjoyment standpoint.
Yeah, do you like that? I think I disagree. I don't know.
I don't want, but you know why? Because like you already see a bit of it where certain players, not even just veteran guys, but guys that become kind of journeymen, they end up becoming the player to be named later that gets shipped around, and their he's $7.5 million. So that's what he is. It's not about who he is or what he does for a team. If you remove these restrictions, then every year you'd see a dozen guys just getting swapped around across the NBA, all to achieve a certain goal of getting superstar X or the key player you want in it. So I think I don't know, maybe it doesn't matter at the end of the day, but and the NBA is it's blown past me in this regard. Like I like, some sense of, those core guys that all play in city X, right? Those days are long gone. But at least this makes it more likely that you keep, I don't know, Udonis Haslem. He's like the mascot of the Miami Heat. He should always be there. He should never be able to get thrown out with the bathwater or something. So I like hearing those names. I don't like seeing that Jeff Green has played on 63 teams and, will forever be known as that guy that was around that time.
I just wish some of these, I totally get what you're saying. I like when guys stay on teams. I wish some of these trades were just a little easier to facilitate, and I think the NBA guys would not enjoy it. They would prefer it because it would just smooth out. Like,
I would prefer that if Kevin Durant wants to go to Miami or whatever, and they have this rookie extension designation, like that thing's annoying. The idea that he's on a rookie extension, okay, and especially when it's, the Nets brought that in via trade, and then that's the stipulation. They didn't give him the rookie extension. He was awarded that, and then they ended up with him, and now that somehow prevents player movement. That piece of it does irritate me in that regard.
And it doesn't, it doesn't allow teams that make monster mistakes to just get out of it super easily. Like, so there's Westbrook probably would have been traded a while ago, except that matching his money is such a pain, right? And so, because you don't want to send out anything of substance, but if you could just get a random draft pick for him, maybe a team would have ended up doing that. Kevin Love would have been traded years ago, right? Because his contract became untradeable. So I don't know. Maybe it's just situation dependent.
By the way, because I know we're going to get out of here, but tune in for the discussion around Donovan Mitchell, because I've got a humdinger lined up here. When we talk about wheeling and dealing, buddy, old Adams flexing the knuckles. He's cracked him and he's at the keys.
It is funny when you start adding like Utah into the mix, like, and the picks they now have and this other stuff, and like where they're kind of going. Like, it really does open up a bunch of different possibilities and
get sexy in a hurry.
Oh yeah, and I don't know. I'm kind of torn on Mitchell. I will save that one for another day. Okay, we're gonna get out of here. Much appreciated everyone that jumped in and instantly told us a million ways from Sunday that Scotty Barnes wasn't enough, or that was too much to give up for Kevin Durant. No need to send in that comment anymore on the. on
Golden State Warriors.
We got it.
For hopping in on the bonus. You don't need to let us know. The Dub Nation does not want Kevin Durant back. We also received that memo, so we're getting a lot of positive.
Loud and clear. Scotty Barnes is untouchable. I heard it 115 comments later. Believe me, I got it. Okay. In the meantime, though, do subscribe over to YouTube, where the numbers continue to grow. I'm kidding about the comments. Leave all the comments in the world. Make sure you like and subscribe over on YouTube. Make sure you subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts, free and available on all platforms. That is the way you help the Locked On Nets podcast.
And listen, we got to get these deals done at some point when they align correctly, because quite frankly, nobody puts baby in a corner. Dirty dancing.
Sequel coming. We will be back again tomorrow talking more Brooklyn Nets basketball.